The vote is the only way to have it's not the only way, but it's certainly one of the most effective ways to have a say in how our government is run. Here's where we stand right now. Democrats are in a strong position to take back the House. The latest numbers from the Washington Post show Dems have a 4-point lead in the most competitive House districts around the country, while analysis on 538 shows Democrats have about a 15% chance of winning the Senate. I will point out, I think 538 gave Donald Trump about a 13% chance of winning the presidency right before the election. So, well, that's what it is. And he won.
Take that into account. President Trump, he is continuing his campaign blitz with a critical stop in Missouri tonight. The Senate candidates there are neck and neck, and if veteran Democrat Claire McCaskill loses her seat, it is almost guaranteed the Democrats will not take back the Senate. Trump has 10 events, 10, planned in the next 5 days, including 2 stops in Indiana, where the Democratic Senate candidate has about a 1-point lead in this deeply red state.
Voters are already coming out in droves to make their voices heard. As of Wednesday, according to NBC News analysis, more than 24 million early votes have been cast, almost double the number at the same time in the 2014 midterms. That's
you
incredible.
Said it yesterday. The greatest news you and I could have.
That's it.
Would be next Wednesday morning, waking up to
Breaking
tell you,
news, record numbers of people have voted. It's not the outcome. It's that you voted. 43% of people casting early ballots are Republicans. 41% are Democrats. 16% identify as other.
Some of the biggest issues affecting how people will vote first, and we talk about this all the time. It is not necessarily the hot button issues that you hear candidates talking about. It's the economy. It's jobs. Second, it's health care. Third, changing how things work in Washington. We've heard that frustration with government leadership. Fourth, looking out for the middle class.
Which is basically the same as economy and jobs and healthcare, right? It's all tied in. When you talk about looking after the middle class, it's economics.
Except here's your issue. You want to look out for the middle class? The president says we have a middle class tax cut coming up. I say where? Not only is Congress not in session, how do you pay for it? The president has given zilch information of how he's going to do that. Because remember,
I can talk about how we paid for the last tax cut. Maybe we can do it the same way, Stephanie.
Don't be sassy.
Okay.
We gave a massive tax cut to corporate America. Now, you could have given a tax cut to corporate America, a lesser one, and an additional one, a separate one for the middle class. We didn't. So now here we are with the tax cut that hasn't paid for itself, and the president is talking about a second one, and we're here to tell you there is no formula to pay for it. Fifth, it's President Trump's favorite one.
Right, it's the last one there, immigration.
Fifth.
But to some of the base, I think that might be one or close to it.
Okay, fine. Let's just say every single person on the migrant caravan makes his or her way to the United States. It will affect almost no one watching right now, no one sitting here's lives, but healthcare, jobs, the economy, education. That's going to affect
Actually, many of those types of people who come in seeking asylum or in some cases asking for, most of these people to be asylum seekers, if they get work in the United States, it tends to be in minimum wage service jobs or agricultural jobs. So in fact, it generally only affects people positively from an economic perspective, because there are farmers across America saying this is causing labor problems. Look, lots to discuss. So we brought Beth Fouie in, senior editor of politics for NBC News, and Bill Kristol, editor at large of the conservative magazine, The Weekly Standard. Thanks to both of you for being here. Hey, I just want to ask this one question. There are NBC...
Just one?
Just one. And then you got the rest of the show.
You got 55 minutes left. You better think of some more.
There are 11 seats in the Senate that NBC says are competitive. Of those 3, Texas is an important one in which Ted Cruz continues to have a lead, and Republicans tend to be voting in larger numbers than Democrats. North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp's at a disadvantage there. And Montana, where the president is going to be, is Claire McCaskill is in a very, very tight race there. All the Republicans need is 3 seats in the Senate to maintain control.
Well, it depends. I mean, they've got control now. If things just stay the way they are, they're going to continue to have control. There's any ways that you could slice this out. It could be a pickup of a couple of seats for Republicans. There is a path, as you said in your intro, for Democrats to take it. It would have to be a complete inside
It's narrow,
straight.
but it exists.
It would almost require Heidi Heitkamp to win that seat in North Dakota, and polling shows her quite far behind now. The Missouri seat, the Indiana seat, really, really tight. Montana, all those seats are red states held by Democrats. They were at a disadvantage right from from the beginning because President Trump is so popular in those places.
Right.
But all of those candidates are, they're incumbents, number one, so there's an advantage to incumbency. And all of them are pretty good representations of their own state. They're not some sort of weird outlier that never should have been there. They're all from those states, and they've got a long history in the states. So they're about the best people to be running in those tough red states. It's still going to be hard just because of the way that the map is looking for Democrats to pull off that inside straight.
Friendly and loving way. You meant Missouri, not Montana, for Claire McCaskill.
Absolutely, I meant Missouri. Thank you for correcting
He's going to
that.
Montana, too.
Right, that's why I was confusing them, because the president's going to a lot of places which need shoring up, and he's trying to help those candidates. But thank you for correcting me.
Bill, what Senate race, which one do you think is the most important?
I'm actually here in Missouri, so I feel like I should say Missouri, which is a very interesting race. And I do think if Claire McCaskill doesn't win it, it pretty much dooms Democrats' chances to hold the Senate. But look, there's still movement in this race. People are looking at polls today. It's Thursday. That means they were in the field probably, Monday, Tuesday night. That's a week before the election. Most voters have made up their mind, but there are undecideds, and they can break in one direction or another. And then you get differential turnout of different groups, which can really affect an election. And I'm a little less confident than everyone else that it's so impossible that the Democrats could win the Senate or that the House could go into a big Democratic number. I feel like there's a little momentum. Usually in these kinds of elections, when there's something of a wave, the wave recedes in early mid-October. There's kind of a bear market rally. I think we discussed this once before, and you were amused by my use of the term, but I'm just, trying to get our financial viewers interested here too, right? But then the major trend kind of reasserts itself, and I feel like that's happening. You see that a little more in the House polling. I just don't know. And the one thing that Trump has done now is introduced immigration in such an incredible way, in a really, to my view, a distasteful and dangerous way. But anyway, into the race, I wonder how much that shakes things up. I think if I were a Republican candidate in some of these red states that Beth mentioned, North Dakota, even Missouri, I might just want a kind of a stable race where you say, you know what, we're the conservatives, they're the liberals, just let's have a normal election, so to speak, in Indiana, Missouri, and those go Republican, obviously, mostly. Instead, he's introduced something that his base loves, but I've got to think there are swing voters here in Kansas City, Missouri suburbs and the St. Louis suburbs who look at that and think, geez, are we going to reward this kind of really extraordinary nativism and rabble-rousing? So I actually think Trump has put the Republicans at a little more risk by what he's done over the last 2-3 days. We've
actually talked to a lot of Republican members of Congress from Kansas, Indiana, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, who all say we're not on side with this immigration thing.
To that point, though, for those who are not on side, let's say those swing voters, doesn't it matter who those Republicans are running against? Because if there's a swing voter that thinks the president's nativism approach, he behaves in a morally reprehensible way, those who think that's too much, the chance they're a swing voter. And if their option on the other side is a far left progressive Democrat, you get a good chance they're going to close their eyes, hold their nose, and vote Republican again.
Sure, it's possible, but what we've said all along, and it's becoming even more so the case now, is that this race is going to be, all the races across the country, this midterm is going to be decided in the suburbs. Suburban voters are really, really engaged. They're really fired up, particularly suburban women. They're voting they're doing early voting in vast numbers. They've been the source of activism all of this time, and they are going to be the voters who are the most important ones in this race.
But
the question is, how is this? Well, that's right. How is the immigration push that President Trump is now doing going to play in those suburban areas, which are typically very swingy? They tend to be very much mixed Republican and Democrat. Bill says he thinks it's probably going to turn them off. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just was going to say that I think by definition, these Democratic senators in red states have won in red states, right? Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp and so forth. So they're not left-wing. They're not Joe Donnelly. They're not, if you're a swing voter, you're not incapable, let's say, of deciding to come back to vote for them at the end. The other thing is it's very hard to judge from early voting. This is a famous trap that people get into. Having said all that, if we really are seeing a surge in early voting, and if there's some surge in young people voting, if some of that is being captured, but more importantly, young people tend not to vote early. So if they vote on election day, that really changes things. I'm sure Beth's done this, I've looked at some of these models a little more closely. The results change a lot if you decide that the electorate is going to be 15% younger voters as opposed to 9 or 10%, because there's such a disproportion in which group favors whom, right? I mean, if you change the composition of the electorate, you change the outcome much more in this election than normally, because there's such a difference between older voters and younger voters, also between suburbs and rural and so forth. So that's why I think Texas, I'm kind of alone in this, I think Texas is in play. I just don't know if O'Rourke can really expand the electorate, but I don't rule it out.
And expanding the electorate by Beto O'Rourke's definition may involve the fact that the heavy Republican turnout, he says some of those people might be voting O'Rourke. We don't know if that's true or not, but that's interesting. We will mark your words, Bill, because you often make predictions and they often turn out true. So thanks to both of you for being here, Bill.
Sometimes not, don't they?
With me, mostly not.
My confusion, Allie, because we just heard over and over the importance of suburban women voters, and I understand that. I just don't understand which way those women are going.
Right. And if they break in significant patterns in one way or the other, that changes the picture. If they don't, and look, I think suburban women voters are a remarkable area of concentration, because many suburban women voters will tell you we're not a thing, we're not a monolith. So
Louise Rule would tell you that.
Right. So it'll be interesting to watch how this. We will be watching it very, very closely. I don't know that there have been exciting midterm elections. I don't know that there are as many that we knew were this exciting going into them, as opposed to the couple days before
Allie,
the day
the
of.
fact that we are looking at early voting numbers that look more like 2016 than 2014,
Unbelievable.
It's a big deal.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.